A quiet autumn evening. A tidy house sits at the end of a small street, yellow light spilling from the window creating a lonely glow in the darkness. Inside, a man in his 50s leans back on the sofa, the TV still on, but his eyes unfocused on the screen. The ceiling fan spins slowly, the clock ticks steadily, forming a monotonous background rhythm. The dining table has been cleared early. A glass with water streaks sits next to an unfinished magazine. His life is stable, his job is good, and finances are no longer a concern. Friends have often encouraged him to open up, to try dating, but he always politely declines. There's nothing wrong with the women he's been introduced to, and it's not that he has completely lost faith. It's just that every time he faces the chance to start a new relationship, a strange feeling rises inside him, hesitation, a vague fear, as if taking just one more step could cost him the hard-earned peace he's finally regained. This scene is not uncommon. Many men who have gone through divorce still keep a certain distance from emotional connection, even after they've moved past the difficult years, financially or emotionally. What makes a man who has it all, career, freedom, health, still choose to sit alone on a quiet evening like this instead of sharing life with someone? To answer that question, we need to go back to the moment that changed everything. The moment of divorce and the scars it left behind, the place where the fear of losing everything again first began. Divorce is not just a signature on paper, it's a deep cut that splits a life in two. For many men, the first thing lost is the home, the place that once symbolized family, now becomes a memory left behind. The car they used to drive on weekend trips, the savings once put aside for retirement plans, all are divided, rearranged under dry legal terms. Once everything has been split, what remains in hand seems lighter, not just in material terms, but emotionally as well. But the most painful part isn't losing money or assets, it's the feeling of losing one's role. The man who was once the pillar, the center of a family, now faces a quiet emptiness in the living room. Dinner has no one sitting across. The familiar laughter and conversations are gone. Each evening becomes a test of endurance for someone who was used to having someone by his side. Many even feel ashamed, unwilling to share with friends or relatives, as if divorce were proof that they had failed at maintaining happiness. Those feelings don't disappear in a few months or even years. They become a layer of memory clinging tightly to the mind, so that each time he considers starting over, he's immediately reminded of what was lost. That fear doesn't shout, it lingers quietly in the smallest decisions. A new date can bring more anxiety than excitement. A question about the future can bring silence, because deep down, he fears that any new connection could bring another loss. That's why many choose to be overly cautious. They set clear boundaries in every relationship, keeping themselves in an absolutely safe zone. Instead of letting emotions lead, they let fear take control. And though on the outside they may appear calm, there remains an inner layer of quiet tension. But those losses are only the beginning. What's even more frightening is the fear of it happening again, the fear of a second loss, and it follows through the years like a shadow that can't be shaken. After going through a major loss, many men begin to build an invisible layer of defense around themselves. They become more cautious with every relationship, closely observing each word, each action of others to spot signs of possible hurt. This caution isn't because they don't want to love, but because they're afraid of paying the price one more time. Like someone who once missed a step, they no longer dare to move quickly. Every step is carefully considered, fearing that one wrong choice could cause everything to fall apart again. To feel safe, they try to control many aspects of life. Everything is neatly arranged, financial plans are calculated in detail, and even in love, they try to stay in control. Some wealthy men in America even consult lawyers to prepare prenuptial agreements early in a relationship, just to ensure that if something goes wrong, they won't lose everything like before. This isn't necessarily coldness, but a deeply ingrained self-protection mechanism. But alongside the caution is a sense of inner conflict. They want someone to share life with, want to love again, but their heart remains hesitant. They are like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, seeing the beautiful view on the other side, but not daring to step forward. On one hand, they crave connection. On the other, they fear that connection might become the beginning of another series of losses. This feeling keeps them in a state of in-between, not completely closed off from the world, but not fully open either. They maintain short meetings, shallow relationships, to feel like they're still living but avoid letting their heart get too involved. This makes life seem stable and low risk, but also lacking the warmth and surprise that love can bring. When fear becomes the guiding compass, life seems safer, but that very safety unintentionally traps them in an invisible box where joy, closeness, and the chance for real happiness become limited. The fear of loss doesn't just stay quietly in the mind, it creeps into every corner of life, creating subtle yet profound effects. When a man lives too long with a sense of caution, his psyche is gradually stretched into a state of isolation. He becomes used to long silences, to dinners alone, to not needing anyone to ask how he's doing or having to explain anything. But inside is the feeling of being separated from a world that continues to move on. Loneliness doesn't come from having no one. It comes from not having enough connection to create real attachment. When fear keeps repeating in the mind, the body is affected too. Stress becomes chronic, sleep is shallow, blood pressure fluctuates, immunity gradually decreases. Many don't realize that always staying on alert keeps the nervous system in a constant state of tension, which directly impacts overall health. From psychology and physiology, the effects begin to spread into the social sphere. A man who was once confident, once the center at work or in social gatherings, now becomes quieter, more distant. Every conversation feels heavier because he's always analyzing whether or not to share, wondering if he'll be judged for saying the wrong thing. The connection skills he once had slowly fade over time. There are opportunities that pass through life that only require a bit of courage to hold on to, but because of too much caution, he lets them go. A woman who once genuinely cared, once gently knocked on the door of his private world, eventually chose to turn away feeling like she couldn't find a way in. That relationship didn't fall apart from conflict, but from silence that lasted too long, from walls too thick for someone outside to find a way through. The feeling of regret only comes later, when one day he looks back and realizes he once had the chance to step out of the safe zone, once had the chance to feel happiness again but didn't take it, just because he was afraid of losing again. So how do you avoid letting the past control the present? How do you both protect yourself and allow yourself to be happy again? The answer doesn't lie in forgetting, but in how a man learns to live with what has passed without letting it define what is to come. No one comes out of a divorce without carrying some fear, but fear doesn't have to become a lifelong barrier. It can become a marker, helping a man see where the boundaries should be kept and where opportunities are worth trying. The first thing to do is to face that fear clearly, not avoiding it, not denying it. Just take a pen and paper and write it down. What am I most afraid of? Is it betrayal, loss of assets, or the feeling of being abandoned? When fear is called by its true name, it's no longer invisible, and once we see it, we can learn to manage it instead of letting it manage us. For those who have experienced loss, financial security is very important. But security doesn't mean closing off. It means actively restructuring everything in a clearer and more sustainable way. That could mean making a clear investment plan, separating assets, signing a prenup if needed. These things don't reduce the value of love, they give both people peace of mind to begin again. Opening up doesn't have to be grand at the start. It can begin with a short conversation with someone who feels easy to talk to. No expectations, no pressure, just giving yourself a chance to feel a real connection. When there are small, positive experiences, the feeling of trust will gradually return. Each step should be gentle, not rushed, but not stagnant either. At the same time, invest back into yourself. Exercise not just to stay healthy, but to feel that you still have energy and vitality. Learn a new skill not just to fill time, but to prove that life can still open up in new ways. Join a community, whether it's sports, reading, gardening, to help regain the sense that you still belong to something bigger. And most importantly, no one can take away what you build for yourself through your own effort and clarity. When a man finds the balance between protecting himself and opening up again, what he gains isn't just the ability to love once more, but a true sense of freedom. No longer having to strain to stay in control, and no longer hiding behind a cold exterior. Everything is decided consciously and clearly. Life is no longer pushed by the past, but becomes a new journey, with limits set by awareness, not by fear. When stepping out of the safety box, what a man receives isn't just the chance to love again, it's the feeling of actively taking charge of life. And sometimes, that feeling is the most valuable thing after all that has been lost. The fear of loss is a very real and very human emotion, especially for those who have come out of a divorce, who have watched everything fall apart in silence, who have stood in the emptiness not knowing where to begin again. But that fear doesn't mean you are weak, and it certainly doesn't mean you have to live forever within the limits it creates. It's simply a part of the journey of growing up, a trace of what has happened, not a compass for every decision that follows. Someone who has lost everything can still find peace again. No need to rush, no need to prove anything. Just choose what makes you feel safe. Live at your own pace, and move forward one step at a time. You don't have to fall in love right away, and you don't have to rebuild a family. You just have to live without avoiding, without closing off because of the past. Peace isn't about having no fear, it's about not letting that fear control the path you take. And if you've been through a divorce, what worries you most when thinking about starting over? Share in the comments. Maybe your story will help another man silently carrying the same fear feel like he's not alone. Because some things can only begin to heal once they are spoken out loud.